residents. The room layout has also been adjusted to increase the distance between microphones and reduce the chance of feedback from an ambient earpiece. As always, these measures are in place so that we can conduct our business without interruption and to protect the health and safety from all participants, including the interpreters. Thank you all for your cooperation. Colleagues, I'd like to now welcome our witnesses. We have appearing for us from the Alliance de l'Industrie Touristique du Québec, Monsieur Sébastien Bénédicte, Vice-Président. Bienvenue à vous, Monsieur. We have from Gander
Welcome,
International
sir.
Airport Authority, Reg Wright, President and Chief Executive Officer, joining us by video conference. Welcome to you, sir. And we have from Northern Air Transportation Association, Robert Kendall, Chair, Alternate Runway Materials. Welcome to you as well. I'd also like to point out, because it's very rare that we have guests, we have Cadra et Beatrice from the University of Ottawa joining us in the back today. Welcome. Hope you enjoy the committee. On va commencer avec vous, Monsieur Bénédicte. Vous avez...
We'll start with you, Mr. Benedict. You have 5 minutes for your opening statement. Over to you, sir. Thank you. Sébastien. So the alliance is simply an alliance representing over 12,000 businesses and 50 regional sector-based tourism associations. We are the largest provincial business federation specializing in tourism. You're probably wondering what tourism has to do with a committee studying the competitiveness of flights to northern and remote regions. Tourism is everywhere in your life, and it's more important than you think. In Quebec, it represents over 24,000 businesses and 350,000 jobs. When you stay in a hotel, it's a tourism business. When you eat in a restaurant, it's a tourism business. You go fishing, hunting, camping, boating, skiing, cruising. You attend a festival event, there's usually tourism business behind it. The vitality of our remote regions depends on a thriving tourism industry. It's crucial not only for the local economy, but also for the occupation of the territory, the protection of our language, and the sharing of our culture. In Quebec, we have administrative regions, but also regions. Quebec is divided into 21 tourism regions. We have Bas-Saint-Laurent, Abitibi-Témiscamingue, North Shore, Saguenay-Saint-Jean, Gaspésie, Magdalen Islands, James Bay, AUHA, and in 2022, out of the total volume of flights in the remote regions in Quebec, only 17% of these flights, of all the flights in 2022 in the remote regions, 17% of the flights, only 3% of these flights were destined for remote areas. So when you hear these figures, you understand that it's very tough, first of all, for an airline company to have reliable and regular flights that are profitable in going to these remote regions. And when you ask tourists why they don't go on vacation to these remote areas, it is always the same 3 reasons: the price, flight availabilities, as well as reliability. In order to address the situation, in April 2022, the Quebec government launched the Programme d'accès aérien région, commonly known as the $500 tickets. As a consumer, I'll simply go to a carrier who has subscribed to the program, and then I'll buy my ticket for Montreal, Saint-Hubert, or different locations. And simply, this company will turn to the Ministry of Transport to get refunded for the balance of the ticket. So, of course, it's not a perfect program. There are a number of things that can be improved. Now, ironically, while the Quebec provides subsidies to make regional flights more affordable, the numerous federal fees inflate the price for airports and airlines. So it's as if we had a fire in these remote regions, with the provincial government throwing water on one side and the federal government throwing gasoline on the other side. So this is a system that's not working, and we need to review the dynamic between the provincial and federal government. In conclusion, in 2020, the Alliance produced a joint brief with the FCCQ, the Federation of in the Federation of Quebec Chambers of Commerce, UMQ, Union of Quebec Municipalities, and CPQ on the situation of regional air transport in Quebec. There were four findings. The first one, air transport is an essential service for the occupation of the territory and development of Quebec and its regions. Secondly, the current regional air transport model does not meet the expectations and aspirations of the regions of Quebec as a whole. Thirdly, overall, there's a willingness to work with existing carriers in the region. And finally, tourism demand has not been properly stimulated, and currently it's difficult to grow the passenger volume. So 4 years and a pandemic later, this observation has not changed. It's the same reality, in spite of the concerted efforts at provincial level to bring together the stakeholders, the government, and carriers. But it takes real synergy between provincial and federal state actors. So if there's something that I'd like us to take home today, with the presence of the alliance here, is that the solutions that we need to come up with solutions in order to make this reliable, and we cannot do that while sidelining tourism. Tourism has to be closely linked and be part of the talks between government and businesses. It is crucial if we want this to become a profitable industry, for us to have connecting flights every day. This cannot be done without the contribution of the tourism industry. That is how we're going to be able to make up for that flight volume. Thank you for considering the tourism industry today for your committee work. Thank you very much, Mr. Benedict. Next.
Mr. Wright, I'll turn the floor over to you. You have 5 minutes for opening remarks, please.
Thank you. I wish I could join you in person today, but glad to be here to make an appearance. I'm from here in Gander in central Newfoundland, which may not be technically considered remote, but on my morning commute this morning, I passed 2 moose and just 3 stoplights, so it is in fact rural. And like most rural communities, central Newfoundland is a very trade-dependent economy. It's home to a billion-dollar perishables industry, notably fisheries and aquaculture. A nascent gold industry is creating thousands of jobs. Tourism is a crucial economic generator, and there's a big flow here of people, labor, and services. So in this big, beautiful home we all call Canada, aviation is really the load-bearing wall that holds us all together. And no mistake, there are some pretty wide foundational cracks have developed since the pandemic, and it has some of us listing for sure. So despite 2019, COVID-19 receding in the rearview mirror, our airport here in Gander has only recovered 2/3 of its 2019 passengers. And there are other airports in Canada facing much worse, some on the precipice of closure. So you'll know airports are crucial public assets, but they also operate as a business. And the primary business of an airport clearly is airplanes and passengers, neither of which has really recovered in many cases. And even in the earliest days of the pandemic, it was very clear that air travel would become less convenient and more expensive. And there's also a fairly clear divide between how passenger traffic and air service have returned to large urban hubs versus regional markets like ours. And I knew then, and I see it now, that clearly the small airports would be the last dogs to the bowl of recovery. So this is where we sit today, and there's 4 real major influences there, forming a sort of, I can't say Bermuda Triangle, Bermuda Rectangle for Canadian travel, which we're coping with now collectively. The first is that there's an acute pilot shortage, which is improving, but still a challenge. And this naturally favors larger aircraft flying between larger cities to achieve economies of scale. It's not just in the cockpit. There's a shortage of qualified personnel in control towers, the maintenance hangar, behind the counter, below the wing, at the border, and other key areas. The second being airline mergers and retrenchment of service at hubs have disproportionately affected smaller Canadian markets. There are some fleet issues as well in terms of aircraft availability, but more particularly the retirement of airplanes in the sub-50 seat market. I can tell you here in Atlantic Canada, in particular, travel within the Maritimes has only recovered about 60%. It's really been eviscerated. And the cost of everything, as we all know as consumers and community leaders, cost of everything's up. Labor, fuel, boring materials, all those things, all those inputs are up, and over 2019, clearly. So it's important to remember that every airline in our nation exists to do an important job for all of us, but also they need to produce returns for shareholders or owners, and that's often done with a quarterly lens. And there's nothing wrong with this. Canada's airlines do a great job, largely, and they must be well capitalized and financially healthy. But however, that mandate contradicts the social and economic utility of dependable air service for rural communities. So ultimately, it puts airlines in a position where they're choosing winners and losers, and they have an outsized voice in which communities flourish and which perish. None of us wants a Canada where only a dozen urban hubs have timely, affordable air service. Rural economies need air access if they're going to remain fertile ground for economic growth. A couple of weeks ago, I was at a meeting of all the Canadian airport CEOs, and we did discuss at that point the need for a true renewed national aviation strategy. So the National Airports Policy, which guides airport operation, and the Blue Skies Policy, which informs international bilateral air service agreements, they're almost 30 years old now. Yet we continue to use them as guideposts. Aviation has changed profoundly over those three decades, and the policy compass really needs to be recalibrated. In my view, part of that strategy should include a couple things, and one is reviewing foreign ownerships and fifth freedom rights within Canada. The second will be working with the airline and industry sectors to recruit new talent with an emphasis on pilots, but there's certainly other key positions in deficit. Government should probably have an assessment of the role it can play in subsidizing and guaranteeing a base level of air service for rural and remote communities, as happens in the EU, United States, Australia, and here in Canada to some extent too. Working with the aircraft manufacturers to incentivize the production of sub-70-seat aircraft that can operate profitably, and I stress profitably, in small, light-density spoke markets. And in the interim, I think more money probably needs to be made available for all small airports for safety-related capital. This is a universal call. All these things take money. There's that recognition, and we do also recognize this is a time of austerity and a time of constraint. I will say this, though. Combined airports pay the federal government $400 million in rent annually, and these funds are not earmarked for reinvestment in the national air network. Instead, they go to Treasury. It can be frustrating because there certainly seems to be a widespread recognition among elected officials of all stripes. Policymakers in Transport Canada, infrastructure and tourism do seem to understand that, reinvesting a portion of that $400 million to strengthen safety and service and make air travel affordable for middle-class Canadians would be a very good investment. So in terms of current context, there's still some very material impacts on our airport. Right now, our balance sheet is a little broken, and our recovery keeps getting pushed further on the horizon. So there's going to be severe tests for Gander and other small airports going forward. And I think I'd close with it's really important that we act collectively and deliberately and keep Canada's best interests at the forefront of our minds. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wright. Next, we'll go to Mr. Kendall. Mr. Kendall, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you. Air service in Canada is, air service in the Arctic is the Trans-Canada Highway for the Arctic locations, okay? The 737 aircraft 200 series provides most of the jet service to these communities in the Arctic. In 2014, I attended a meeting with Boeing where they said that the 737-200 would no longer be supported for its gravel kit operations and that they would no longer be producing aircraft that would replace the 737-200. In 2017, we formed a committee called the Alternate Runway Materials Committee to investigate the suitable wearing surfaces that would be able to work as efficiently as asphalt or concrete. And the reason for that is because asphalt and concrete are suffering seriously due to permafrost implications in the Arctic. Today, numerous aircraft are being manufactured with composite materials, and many of these aircraft are not going to be certified for gravel runway operations, of which there are well in excess of 90 gravel runways servicing communities in the Arctic. The reason composites coming into being a material of choice is that it improves fuel efficiency, it increases the cargo that can be carried in the aircraft, lowers operational costs, and increases the capabilities of lowering prices to communities themselves. However, debris from gravel runways can puncture these composite materials, and it causes very serious damages, punches holes right through the aircraft, and it's very expensive to repair, and is a serious safety issue. We've been working with Transport Canada, and they're in the process of developing a new category of hard surface. For materials to be recognized as a new hard surface, they have to demonstrate that they're capable of the same level of safety as traditional hard surface runway materials. That would be asphalt, asphaltic concrete, and concrete. Testing is going on to verify that the structural integrity, durability, and friction characteristics, as well as their behavioral characteristics for working in Arctic conditions, are approved. Upgrading to the new category of the hard service improves safety for all aircraft. Doesn't matter whether it's a turboprop or a jet. If it's a new, as the future rolls on and these new carbon fiber aircraft are brought into service, they'll all end up with problems from gravel. Without reliable large capacity air service to Arctic airports and communities will continue to experience high prices for goods and services and reduced levels of service. Current materials being considered for these new categories are thin bituminous, which is being used extensively throughout the northern Saskatchewan area right now. Aluminum, which is a military-based product, been in use for over 50 years in military applications. And there is a facility in California that has been running an aluminum airport for 48 years. The aluminum links together in panels and is laid over the gravel surface. It takes some time to lay the surface, but it does not affect the service at the runway itself, at the airport itself, because they can be transitioned on a daily basis from where they've laid to where they're about to lay surface. The next product is a high-density polyethylene matting, and it links basically the same way as the aluminum panels do, and goes over the existing gravel surface. And again, aircraft servicing is not interrupted. Both of these issues, or both of these materials, can be easily removed if there's a problem with permafrost on the center of the runway, or if there's drainage issues, and then the problem can be repaired and the matting put back in place. And it can all be done with the airport staff, where if you had asphalt or concrete, you'd have to have specialists and specialist machinery coming in to make some of those repairs. Two other substances we're working with is one is called EK35, and the other one's called Dust Blocker, and they're both soil stabilization products. And the EK35 has been in use in the Arctic now for 20 years at several airports, primarily mining operations and what have you, but they have reduced the gravel problems at these airports. However, they do have to be looked after on a regular basis and consistently upgraded. Aluminum aluminum, HD matting, and soil stabilizers are also considered to be environmentally friendly products. The main advantage of upgrading these airports to non-gravel surfaces is to improve the safety for all types of aircraft and return jet service back to Arctic communities. Right now, Canadian North, Air North, and very soon Air Inuit will be retiring their 737-200s. The only ones operating will be a charter group, Nolanor, and I believe it's Chrono. So it's important to get the runways that require a repair done. For example, you've got Cambridge Bay that used to receive jet service, Klugtuk, Old Crow. They receive services 12 months of the year. Okay, done.
Thank you, Mr. Kendall. I'm sure you'll be able to share that information during the line of questioning.
Yep.
That will be forthcoming. Colleagues, it's a pleasure for me to welcome to committee Mr. Herbert Pond, the Mayor of the City of Prince Rupert. Welcome, sir. The floor is yours for your opening remarks. You have 5 minutes, Mr. Mayor. I'll just ask that you unmute yourself. There you go.
There we go. Thank you. Good morning. And as you said, my name is Herb Pond. I'm the mayor of Prince Rupert. As an aside, I happened to work in the airline industry for about 20 years when we went through airport devolution and deregulation of airlines. And so I kind of have an interesting perspective on all of it. This morning, I hope to frame my comments through the lens of nation building. Most of the concerns of today's leaders most of the concerns that today's leaders deal with come from the vast majority of Canadians living in large urban centers. They're grappling with growth and the challenges of maturing cities, but not nation building. But there still remains a portion of the country that's very much pioneering Indeed, nation building, and that's certainly the case in Prince Rupert, where 12,000 residents are creating one of Canada's most important trade corridors, currently Canada's third largest port. The most recent announcement by AltaGas brings the current committed projects to over $2 billion in the Port of Prince Rupert. Changes in the broader economy and the way that government services are delivered have made the task of nation building more difficult than it used to be. The tools available at the community level have become outdated. It used to be that a town grew up around an industry. Merchants built retail shops and paid property taxes. Workers brought families, built homes, and paid property taxes. Those taxes paid for the services that kept the town alive, and that was the compact, and it worked. Today, the retailers in small towns drive vans with Amazon logos, and they pay no local taxes. And increasingly, the workers are fly in, fly out, and pay little or no local taxes. And the same in a different way is true of airlines and airports. Not long ago, Transport Canada owned and operated our airport and many, many others. And it was a recognition that in nation building, communities require core assets to be put in place because they're necessary long before they're viable. And not long ago, airlines actually held rights to certain routes, which allowed them to make investments in those routes and commit to their development. Today, airlines move like piranhas in feeding frenzies, seeking only the most lucrative markets. A community like Prince Rupert with a heavy industrial base has no choice but to maintain an airport. We are not only a heavy industrial base, but we're the hub for 4 other First Nations communities who depend completely on access to that air ambulance service. There must be access to air ambulance service or the port will fail. This is particularly true in the winter months when travel by road to the nearest airport is often ill-advised or not possible at all. So the community of Prince Rupert watches with grave concern as air carriers play their game of three-dimensional chess with their rationed equipment and flight crews. Fare wars right now in our neighboring community draw traffic from our airport. We estimate roughly 40% of our air traffic now moves through our neighbor's airport. That traffic justifies more flights next door and fewer flights in Prince Rupert. And the fewer flights mean it's more difficult to fly in and out of Prince Rupert, which means even less traffic. In Prince Rupert, what was once 5 jets a day in the 80s is now down to 1 Q400 daily. And we worry that without intervention, that trend is irreversible. All kinds of other infrastructure disappears as that process is taking place. Rental car companies and the support services for the airlines. And so the burden gets shifted to the local taxpayer, and that burden becomes enormous. So I thank you for the opportunity to speak, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Mayor Pond. Begin our line of questioning today with Mr. Muse. Mr. Muse, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for participating today. I want to direct my first set of questions to Mr. Kendall. We had last meeting here someone who appeared as an individual, but they were with Arctic Aviation, and was speaking about the aluminum runways, and I understand she's going to be submitting a written brief as well, which would be instructive, I think. But maybe we can start with that. It seemed to me that that was a good opportunity to expand the capabilities of our northern airports. And I know you spoke to that. You were cut off towards the end. You were about to maybe cite some of the statistics around that and some of the locations. So maybe you can pick up there.
So the aluminum runway is a system that has been in use by primarily the American military and NATO partners for, as I said, over 50 years. They land everything on it from jets through to heavy transport, carrying up to 850,000 pounds. And the company that has developed an aluminum runway for military use has now developed one for commercial use, which is twice as strong as the military version, and has been designed ideally for locations where there is going to be limited maintenance capabilities, something that only that would be able to deal with permafrost issues, and it's going to last for years. And the reason that we have, I took a group of people down to 29 Palm Air Marine Training Base to show them the runway that has been there for 48 years. And some of the panels that are on that runway are the same ones that were installed 48 years ago. So we know that it's going to last. The problem is that in thinking on the money side of it, is it's probably 2 to 2.5 times as expensive as putting down an asphalt runway. But over the course of 40 years, at about the 20-year mark, it becomes equal to an asphalt runway because you don't have to resurface it all the time. And over the course of 40 years or 50 years, of course, it's far cheaper, and it's totally recyclable.
So let me ask, because you indicated you've been working with Transport Canada, and you indicated a timeline of the last 10 years, frankly, since 2014, when some of these problems have been identified with the jets being able to land. So what have you encountered? Have there been regulatory hurdles, delays?
Not so much hurdles. It's informing Transport Canada of the product itself, then setting down some standards that would have to be put in place in order to test to ensure that it's got the safety aspects that are necessary and equal to or better than asphalt or concrete runways that are in place today. And as we moved along with that process, it became more involved when we ended up with other companies coming along and saying, well, we might have a product that's equal, that will do the job too. And
So where is that process at today, and
it's at
what's the projected timeline?
Right now, they're reviewing the technical data for the aluminum surfaces, and there will be some final tests that are needed at the university level to verify the tests. The HD matting is in the process of being tested now, and we should have results from that within the next 4 to 6 months to determine whether or not it will be suitable for runways. We already think it might be suitable for tarmac areas and taxiways. So, and there's talk now and discussions now as to whether or not there might be a combination of materials that can be used to lower the cost for putting these runways in place. So, it's but there are issues with asphalt right now in Arctic communities, and there's issues even with gravel runways. It's they're getting less snow, more rain. There's runoff issues, and of course the permafrost is a serious problem. So.
Thank you. Let me turn as well to Reg Wright from the Gander, Newfoundland, which has got a famous history and a great story around it. But I can empathize with some of what you're saying, because just yesterday I was disappointed to learn that WestJet has dropped a couple of flights out of my home airport of Hamilton, Ontario, to Halifax and St. John, so fewer people traveling to the great province of Newfoundland. And so you talked about the recovery of passenger traffic since 2019 and labor shortages and retirement of planes and a number of the issues around that. We've heard from from airlines, both the large airlines and also the smaller ones servicing the north and remote areas, that costs, fees, regulation are all adding to the price of tickets, which has an impact. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think anything that adds to the end use of the consumer does choke off demand for sure.
And you indicated in your testimony that obviously the cost of materials is up as you're looking to do a number of projects and as you're looking for traffic to return to Gander Airport. What would be the impact of the carbon tax on that? I mean, obviously carbon tax is applied to the cost of materials, but also anything that goes into operation of the airport. Are you able to quantify what that might be for Gander?
Yeah, absent my accountant being here, I mean, anything new and incremental certainly does add to our operating cost. And your point on the airlines talking about fees and regimes. It's important to keep in mind that Gander Airport is a national airport system airport, and we took the airport on behalf of the federal government with the intent that the community was best positioned to represent the airport's needs and the needs of constituents. But it also set up, it's based on airports being self-sustaining and recovering their costs through users' fees, and we've done a very good job of that, I believe, in most ways. I do know the last year that Transport Canada operated the airport before transfer. I think they lost $12 million before capital investment. In today's dollars, they had 155 employees. And, in the 20 years we've ran it, it was only since the pandemic that we haven't had covered our operating costs or had loss-making years.
Thank you.
Sorry.
No worries. Thank you, Mr. Wright. Unfortunately, because you're not here, I can't give you the 15-second warning. My apologies. We'll turn it over now, prochainement, Monsieur Iacono. Monsieur Iacono, la parole est à vous.
Mr. Iacono, you have 6 minutes, please. Thank you, Chair, and I wish to thank the witnesses for being here this morning. Then my questions are for Mr. Benedict. First of all, I congratulate you, sir, for your hard work in the field of tourism in Quebec. I know that you are very committed and your leadership makes a big difference. Let us know about accessibility of flights to northern, rural and remote communities in Quebec. Has that improved over the last several years, or has it deteriorated? Well, if we speak purely in terms of numbers, before the pandemic and the more recent ones that we have for 2022, 76% of volume pre-pandemic has been recuperated in remote regions. So we haven't yet returned to the full capacity pre-pandemic. Is there a factor in there? It's still 2 or 3 years later. Are there still effects that are continuing, or has there been a deterioration in flights? What can explain that? What can explain that we have not recuperated to that extent? Well, the cost of tickets is a problem because we have $500 tickets in Quebec, but on the other hand, then they're limited only for departures from Montreal, Quebec, and Saint-Hubert. So inter-region flights, it doesn't apply there. So Canadian Airlines often offer turnkey packages for international destinations. Do they do this with regional tourism destinations in Quebec? There are some, but the reliability of the flights is a problem because this is something where we rarely see. I mean, most international tourism is really the main regions in Quebec visiting, 98, 99% are Quebec tourists who go there. And through your consultations with businesses and tourism associations, whether regional or sectoral, do you have any solutions that have come out to ensure that air transport services could fulfill the needs of tourism? Yes, well, we have a program that we are mandated to use by the Quebec government. 2 years ago, they invested $10 million for new international connections. I'll explain the connection with the regional market. We have target areas or target markets such as Mexico, France, USA, where we want more direct flights. So what we've just done is that the airlines may apply for that program, and if they're accepted, there are 3 types of financing that they can receive. You can finance business plans for viability of new links. You can do risk management, so they launch a new link, a direct link, and if the link comes at a loss, then the government covers that through the financing in that program for the loss of the airline, and also we can finance the promotion of it, because it's one thing to create the links. If people don't know that it exists, they won't fly it. So this program allows that for international links. Now, reproducing that link for regional flights, in our opinion, could work. So programs so that airlines can apply to that to get regressive funding over 3 or 5 years. The first year they could have risk management at a certain number of millions, and it could come down a bit by bit each year until it becomes fully profitable. Of the 3 kinds or ways of approaching it, which one is the most used out of those that you mentioned, and which is most profitable? For risk management, that's what the airlines need the most, to make sure that if the flight runs at a loss, that they don't have a loss. So they cover that. All three are important, but I would say that 90% of the envelope is really in the risk management side. For how many years have you been using that type of format? 2 years? It's only been 2 years now that the Quebec government gave us that mandate, and we had an initial mandate envelope of 10 million, which will soon be fully used. In the last few years, in the previous years, you had an increase in tourism, people who came to Quebec and so on. Here we're talking about international flights. Yes, exactly. But my point is that that model could be used for flights within Quebec or elsewhere in Canada, within a given province, in order to fly to the regions. How do you see the future of regional air transport in Quebec, and why is it important to you? Well, the future of regional air transport in Quebec, as I said in the opening remarks, is a service we consider essential to occupy the territory. If we're not able to visit the regions, then the vitality of those regions will decrease. And also, we're convinced that tourism is a way to keep those regions alive and enable them to thrive. So we need to facilitate regional flights. As of now in Quebec, the program I talked to you about, for the $500 tickets, we have a few companies using it: Air Canada, Air Quebec, Air Inuit, Air Liaison, PAL Airline, and Pascal Aviation. So to different sizes of companies, of course. So we can see that this is something where there is a need for the airlines, but we have as much need to subsidize tickets for people to go there. It's a problem. It's not viable in the long term. Subsidies come from taxpayers' pockets, so we need to make those flights profitable. As you said earlier, both levels of government, Quebec and Canada, ought to work more together and collaborate more. Could you give us a few approaches of how to do this so that both levels of government work in a collaborative way with you to ensure that we can increase this tourism industry? Yes, well, one of the examples, and here I'll cite a number from Air Canada, a flight from Montreal to Rouen-Noranda at 640 kilometers. Washington to Charlotte in North Carolina, it's 140 kilometers. The same flight in distance in Canada, it's $158 of cost. In US, it's 73. It's more than double. So I don't want to go into each individual costs of navigation, security fees, and airport fees. Are certainly some of those fees that are justified, but when the destinations that we compete with can offer a ticket price that is half because it's not competitive, and it's in some way ironical that we're subsidizing tickets because they're too expensive. So we use taxpayer money, so the consumer pays $500. But on the other hand, there are all kinds of fees that increase the cost of the ticket, and as soon as you're in a destination where the $500 tickets don't apply, then the problem is quintupled. Thank you, Mr. Benedict. Thank you. Next, we have Mr. Lemire. Over to you. You have 6 minutes, please. Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your welcome. I'm going to go along the same lines as my colleague, Mr. Iacono. First of all, I'd like to ask you a question. Air transport is under the jurisdiction of which government? Is it a provincial jurisdiction or is it an area of federal jurisdiction normally? Well, listen, I'm not sure if the idea is to get into a jurisdictional squabble, but I'll give you a kind of a political response. But occupation of the territory is a jurisdiction that I think is both provincial and territorial, or federal rather. We have a large province. Quebec, as I said, is 1.5 million square kilometers, 5.6 inhabitants per square kilometer. It's quite disproportionate compared to other destinations that we compete with. So, in order to get to your question in a roundabout way, the airports and access to our regions are important both from the federal and provincial point of view. I don't think that one can unload all the responsibility to the other. I like your answer very much, but what I note in Quebec is that often when it's a matter of solutions for regional air transport, the federal government, well, it's a jurisdiction, if we refer to the British North America Act, and that didn't exist in 1867, air travel, but the federal government has a responsibility And if there's a government that's proactive, it's more Quebec than Ottawa. Now, as an MP from Abitibi-Témiscamingue, I find it interesting that you use the example of Rouyn-Noranda compared to a flight in Washington. But the reality, it's more expensive to go to Paris than to the regions. And that's been the case for a long time. I'd like to hear you on the system of the payer, the user pays, or the free market. To what extent is that something that hampers effective air links? And what role can be played, in fact, by the governments to ensure that we can have an affordable, reliable, frequent, and efficient service for our regions? Do we need to shift our paradigm once and for all? Yes, the current model, in our opinion, is not working. So you cannot have, well, I just have the numbers for Quebec, but you cannot have flights with 13 passengers on average to the regions and expect the airlines to offer that in a profitable way. And I'm not here to defend that, but once you base it on that principle, those regional flights have to be filled. So what we'd like to do is that all remote regions or the hubs should have 2 flights in the morning and 5 and 2 in the evening at least $500, and we should fill those flights. So can we launch programs to help the airlines in the short term to fill those links? We perhaps could put rates of 70% reserved tourists, 20% for business, or whatever. We can put parameters on it to make sure that all the people that take those flights, we end up not with just locals who have to travel and they cannot fill those flights alone. One of the challenges we consider is that the costs that are passed on to passengers are about 40% of the ticket. We're talking about various tickets, airport fees, so on. We know that the federal government is going to collect $50 to $60 million from the Montreal airport, for example. Obviously, those bills are passed on to the customer. Is it normal for people who are going to Abitibi-Témiscamingue go to Montreal and so they use those services, but should they have to pay for such a large infrastructure that serves the international level, whereas that's our reference point in order to go to Canada's major city. The same thing for the tourism. There's a certain cost that's passed on, and in the meantime, the Americans invest millions of dollars in their infrastructure by the government, but we our governments or the governments, and we target the user in order to pay for that. Is this a pathway you could explore? I like the fourth proposal you made when you say that we've thought over the fact that we're not maximizing our industry, we're not maximizing our flights. In contrast, all the signals are for people not to take planes. How can we change that tendency and bring down the fees concretely? Of course, if we ask the user to always pay, then we see what we have now. The example that you gave is it costs less to go to Paris than to go to certain regions in Quebec. Of course, that's an example that people have in mind. We also hear, well, it's less expensive to take a full package for a vacation than to take a vacation here at home. A lot of stereotypes are involved. If we ask the user to pay for it, that's a model that is not going to be viable in the long term. We talked about percentages. A plane ticket often for a tourism represents up to 40% of the cost of the travel. When you plan a vacation, if your budget for a family or an individual, if 40% of that money is just for the plane ticket, then certain destinations are completely out of reach or not attractive. So it can't work like that. Obviously, it requires some government money to be injected in order for the infrastructure to deal with the infrastructure and to have new links. In the cost, there's also NAV Canada cost, which is an essential service that is public but was privatized that could also be provided by the federal government if you want to have the viability of our airports in the regions. In Quebec, there are certain committees, you can tell us more about that, for discussion of how to improve transport, air transport, and government initiative. Who sits on that, and is the federal government represented? There is a committee that was launched 2 years ago, the Permanent Air Committee by the Quebec Department and also airlines, the tourism industry, airports. Right now, there's no federal representative on it. Thank you very much, Mr. Benedict, and thank you, Mr. Lemire.
Mr. Backrack, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses. This has been a really interesting study, and I can't wait till we get to the report and the recommendations. I want to thank Mayor Pond for joining us to bring another Northwest BC perspective to the committee. And I think with your airline background as well, it's going to be a great contribution to the committee's work. Mayor Pund, you talked a little bit about the deregulation of the airport sector and the airline sector, and the devolution of airports to municipalities in the 1990s. And I wonder, in your view, if that has been a good deal for small municipalities like Prince Rupert, or whether, in hindsight, the costs of that approach have outweighed the benefits.
Yeah, I would say the latter in our case. There's many benefits. So I don't want to rain on the whole parade. There's been a tremendous benefit. I think it's lowered costs for Canadians. There's been efficiencies achieved. Certainly the major airports where there's significant traffic, and you can actually make a go of those airports. But if we believe that air service is critical to community life, and I would argue very strongly that it is in my community's life, we just won't be able to continue to do what we do without air service. Then you have to ask yourself, is this free market system meeting the need, or is it putting Canada's third busiest port in jeopardy? And I would argue the latter. There are challenges, and municipalities can't. The local, I sort of went through the litany of the other challenges to the tax base. Municipalities can't be picking up everything. The local retired teacher that wants to stay in Prince Rupert can't be the one that has to pay for everything.
When you talk to businesses, potential investors in the community, what do they tell you about the impact that the current availability and price of air service has on their decision-making process?
What it does is it sort of amalgamates all the. It's hard to describe it, but everything goes to the winner here, right? If there's a nearby airport, there is in the case of Terrace, it's accessible most of the year, so it's not reliable for us on an emergency basis, but it's available most of the year. As more and more traffic goes through there, as WestJet and Air Canada hammer it out and fight each other for fares and whatever, there more traffic flows there. Then what happens is the rental car companies all build their capacity there, and so increasingly those businesses are saying, look, we want to come through Prince Rupert. We actually, when you look at the safety of moving their crews down the highway versus landing in Prince Rupert, that's a safety factor for those industries. They don't want to incur 2 hours of highway driving down the Skeena River, although it's beautiful. They don't want to take the risk with their crews, but they are simply forced to, because with a single flight a day, there's not enough choice in terms of frequency. The market is there. That's the most frustrating part, is the market is there. But without some sort of kick or catalyst, Air Canada and WestJet will deploy their resources fighting each other rather than serving a particular community. And I don't think that policy meets Canada's need, quite frankly.
You mentioned the two big carriers fighting it out in markets where they both see a business case. In really small markets, there isn't likely to be enough traffic to justify having two carriers, to allow two carriers to coexist and compete. And so I'm wondering what your ideas might be around how to ensure affordability and to attract those investors to the community. This all relies on having relatively affordable airfare and reliable airfare and enough frequency. How do you do that in the absence of competition? And what role can the federal government play in that equation?
Well, the airfare part is something that is hard. That's hard. But I think a certain amount of minimum service could be a requirement of a license. It could be a requirement. If you're going to operate in in British Columbia or in Canada or whatever, there should be some requirement to say you're going to maintain a minimum amount of service in this community, this community, this community. We actually do a fairly good job of holding Air Canada accountable on a regular basis. We will call them up and say, listen, have you looked at your fares out of Prince Rupert? Have you looked at your fares out of Terrace? Why? And they'll do it. But if you don't keep your eyes on them, they bump them right. This was my frustration, honestly, when I worked for the airline industry. I was then CP Air. We had the highest revenue miles flying in and out of northern communities like Prince Rupert, anywhere in the system. We made more money revenue miles than they did flying to Tokyo or anywhere else. And yet, they would put all their equipment into battling each other between Calgary and Vancouver. And it was like, really, like, come make some money up here. They can make money here. That's the most frustrating part, is they can make money here. But they're just intent on fighting with each other for market share.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mayor Pond, and thank you, Mr. Backrack. Next, we have Mr. Strahl. Mr. Strahl, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. My question for Mr. Wright to begin. We've certainly heard, we've just done a study on Lynx Air, the latest low-cost carrier to abandon their project of providing low-cost fares for Canadians, and they cited some of the regulatory burdens and the high fee environment. We've heard previous panels in that study talk about how the federal government treats the aviation sector as a bit of a cash cow, and I'd like to get your feedback on that. I guess I'd first like to, if this information is public or you're willing to share it, the amount that your airport paid in airport rents to the federal government in the last year, for which figures are available.
Sure. Actually, as part of pandemic support, our payments to the federal government were waived essentially for last year, and we'll resume payment this year. For our airport, it's not a sizable amount. It runs to about, I think it's about $55,000-$60,000 a year based on a graduated revenue formula. But when you get into major hubs, it's sizable rent figures for that. And yeah, I mean, we have been asked to operate under a user pay system, and that's what airports have done. That is, they try to collect enough money from passengers and users to fund capital, and there's no getting around it. It does add cost to the system. So sure. You know, there's a bigger thing at play with, you know, who should be operating airports. I think the current model has a lot of positives in terms of service and capital and infrastructure, and there's a bit of a legacy over 20 years. But I think it's fair to beg the question of who should be operating them, because it does add to the cost for sure.
Right, and what's your current airport improvement fee charge for passengers?
Right, so ours would be in the top 75th percentile in Canada. So ours is currently at $35, and there's a very simple reason for that. We have to spread operating costs across too few passengers. So that's added to the ticket, not unlike some of the other charge fees and charges that are there that I know airlines don't like, and we don't like anything that destimulates travel either. Right. But that's a product of trying to finance. I mean, we got an airport here built in '59 for an era that's long past, and we have to finance that based across very few users in a user pay model.
Right. And do you have offhand the amount of grants and contributions you receive directly from the federal government in terms of airport infrastructure funding, or did they buy you a new snowplow or anything like that last year in terms of the direct investment from the feds into your operation?
Right. No, there were a suite of measures that happened over the pandemic to sort of carry us through when our business fell off 90%, and we had to stay open for non-commercial reasons such as life-saving and medical support and things like that. So I think that amounted to almost $6 to $7 million, and did include, for a limited time, national airports like Gander were included in what's called the Airport Capital Assistance Program. You might be familiar with, which is made available to divested airports. Our argument, of course, is it's not enough in that fund. I think it's $40 million, and that hasn't changed in decades.
Right.
And NASA airports aren't eligible because we're supposed to be self-sufficient.
So they collect about 400 million, and there's a $40 million fund that distributes to everyone. You mentioned as well a review of the foreign ownership limits. Were you referring to what part of the aviation sector were you referring to there? Were you referring to the airports themselves, or the airlines? I know we heard some who believe that the limits within the 49% foreign ownership should be lifted to allow maybe one entity to hold that much. Is that what you were referring to, or was there another component there that you were talking about?
No, I was referring to the airlines, and I don't have a strong opinion on one way or another, but I think it's important to have at least a cursory look at it and to see if it would be stimulating. I mean, certainly, I joined the rest of Canada and seeing that the collapse of Lynx Air is poor for Canadians. That's not something anyone wants to see, and ultimately, competitive pricing is going to be a function of the level of competition that is in fact profitable. We can't ever expect airlines to operate unprofitably at our airports. It's not like a bricks and mortar investment. They have wings. They don't make money. They fly away. So it's very, very crucial that they're all healthy and have good balance sheets and all that good stuff. I guess the question here today is, how do we work together to ensure that?
Right. Mr. Chair, I can't see your red flag there. How much time do I have left?
You have 45 seconds, Mr. Strahl.
Okay, I'm going to ask Mr. Kendall. We talked about the 737-200 series plane from Boeing, essentially 10 years ago now, being no longer supported for gravel kits. That's obviously the workhorse in the north. What is the anticipated service gap between when that air frame is no longer going to be viable and the new runway materials might come online? Are we looking at a crisis here where we're going to hit a major service gap for the north?
At this point, there's certainly enough. I won't say enough, but there are runways that have asphalt, and they will operate aircraft that do not have gravel kits. So Iqaluit, Inuvik, Whitehorse, Yellowknife, places of that nature. And cargo will come in there. They'll be offloaded onto aircraft that can go to gravel runways. And it's just that with the pilot shortages and things, and crew hour problems that are existing, flights are reduced and service is reduced. So some of the communities rely on air service 12 months of the year. If you get above 60 degrees latitude, 12 months of the year, everything comes in, passengers, cargo, what have you. So if you're running with an aircraft that carries 1/4 of the load of a jet,
Thank you, Mr. Kendall.
Four aircraft.
Thank you so much. And